Black mental health is dripping in Black.
Welcome to the Dripping in Black podcast, where we celebrate Black excellence throughout the Black diaspora. Our special guest host is Dominic Lawson from the Black is America podcast.
All right, let's do it. What's up, good people all across the world? This is the Dripping in Black podcast. I'm your guest host, Dominic Lawson. I'm a multi-award winning podcaster and host of the critically acclaimed Black is America podcast, where I highlight little known African-American figures and stories. And just want to say again, really quickly, thank you to the man behind the glass at Square for this amazing opportunity. Obviously, you've been seeing me and Dr. Pete doing these guest host spots, and so clearly we are trying to do our best to kind of maintain the amazing Black excellent brand that is Dripping in Black. Now, before I continue, you see the fit, got to get that in there, obviously. So if you want one of these hoodies and mugs and stuff like that, go to dibkdripshop.com to get your latest and Dripping in Black gear. Once again, that is dibkdripshop.com. And so now, since we have paid the bills, let's get to the task at hand. She is a writing coach and award-winning author of multiple books that contain compelling narratives that challenge societal norms and spark meaningful conversations. Her latest book is Roux, which takes the reader into the lives of African-American families with their unique hardships, triumphs, and relationships, culture, and values. And as you can see, Dripping in Black family, I got my copy right here on the screen in the Kindle. So make sure you get yours as well. And you can get that a copy of yours at TamikaChristy.com. She is the phenomenal, the talented. She is Tamika Christy. TC, how are you, ma'am?
I am great. What an introduction. Thank you so much.
Hey, listen, we try to hype our people up here on Dripping in Black. That is what we do. But it's very easy when we have phenomenal guests such as yourself. So again, thank you so much for coming on the Dripping in Black podcast. So, hey, let's get right into it. So I kind of talked about a little about what you do, but let's talk about who you are a little bit. Like who is Tamika Christy? I know you was born in Oakland, California. Tell me a little bit about growing up in Oaktown a little bit.
I am an Oakland native, which is there are very few of us left here in the Bay Area. There's been a lot of movement and a lot of gentrification like other cities across the world. So I'm an Oakland native. I'm a mom. I am sort of a de facto matriarch of my extended family. My maternal side of the family, I did lose my mom and actually all of her siblings. And so at an early age, I became sort of this de facto matriarch. So even though I'm 50, sometimes I feel like I am like much older. I am a writer. I am a creative. I am the daughter of a Pentecostal minister. And I am an auntie. I have a 12-year-old nephew that I am raising. So I am all the things.
I hear that. You were talking about a little bit about the gentrification in Oakland and stuff like that. And we do see a lot of people, kind of shifting around the California area. Has that had any bearing on you as a writing coach, as an author and stuff like that? Has that, kind of shifted or changed how you kind of move in that space? Kind of talk about that a little bit.
It does. When you grow up somewhere, when you're a native, you are used to what you've grown up with. And there was a rich culture in Oakland. And I'm sure you know the Black Panthers originated here. There are a lot of Black businesses that we had. Recently, the Coliseum moved from Oakland, where the Warriors play, over to San Francisco. And that in itself was a huge change, because you go from attending a basketball game where you see people that you maybe haven't seen since high school, or you just run into people. Now it's moved over to San Francisco, where it's primarily tech. I am a writer who gleans inspiration from people watching and settings. And so sitting out at the lake sometimes is very different. The kind of people that you come across are very different. So it's a lot different than it used to be back in the 80s when I was growing up. I don't know that it's better or worse. I don't know the cause or how, like from a different kind of perspective, whether it's better or worse. But for me, there definitely is a difference. I miss going places and seeing my people.
Gotcha. No, I definitely understand that. You mentioned the sports reference with the Golden State Warriors. I think I was just looking at a report the other day that I think the Oakland A's, I actually going to move to Sacramento like next season or something like that. So there's definitely some changes there to be had. But let's kind of talk about the good times. Take me back to the 80s in Oakland and growing up and what that was like. Tell me about that experience.
Oh, it was awesome. Well, I was a Pentecostal, my dad was a minister, so I was a PK. So we spent a lot of time in church, a lot of time.
Okay.
But Oakland was just dope. I remember when I was in second grade, we moved around a lot. So I've lived in a lot of different neighborhoods in Oakland. And in second grade, I remember catching the city bus from one neighborhood to the other. And I was really tired and I fell asleep on the bus. And so this woman woke me up and she's like, "Are you okay? Like, I think we passed your stop." And I'm 6 or 7. I wake up like, oh my God. So she's like, "It's fine. We're going to drive to the end of the route and then we're going to turn around and hopefully you will find your neighborhood." And of course we did. And I let myself in the house with my key because that's what I did. And I don't think I ever told my dad that story, but it felt safe. You ran into people who were like your aunts and your moms. If somebody was doing something they weren't supposed to do, they would be immediately corrected. There was just a respect for family and our older like aunts, uncles, neighbors, and people that I feel like is not there. It's not really there anymore. The soul food restaurants were off the chain, like so many good restaurants. All of the different celebrations that we would have throughout the city. Festival at the Lake was always popping. It was a good time. Oakland is still dope. Like even with everything that's happening right now, I feel like Oakland is still so resilient. There's a lot of crime. I'm sure you've heard in the news. We're big on this bipping thing. Um, but what I think a lot of people don't realize is that it's not Oakland natives. It's not residents of Oakland. It's people who are coming from some of the outlying cities or come from the further cities coming into Oakland because of what they perceive maybe are people with money. And then there are also other issues. We didn't have a police chief, very lenient DA. So there are a lot of like the perfect storm of things that were happening to make the crime possible. But Oakland in itself is still a really great city. It's still super dope. But there has been a lot of gentrification.
No, for sure. And Oakland is definitely one of those great American cities that where it seems like it's going through a change, right? We see it, here in Memphis, we see it in a number of places, right? And so it's like and I understand what you mean by like, not really sure if it's good or bad. It's just simply different, right? Because there's pros and cons on both sides, right? But you was talking about being a second grader and being on the bus and stuff like that. Were you also kind of like doodling and writing at the time and creating stories in your head and kind of walk me through that part of your story a little bit?
Yeah, I used to journal. I didn't start journaling in the second grade, but I did start journaling in fifth and sixth grade. I got a
Okay.
journal for Christmas, and that's when I started doing journal entries. And I realized that they weren't the typical journal entries, they were more like these short stories that I was creating. And it really was a way for me to get through a lot of trauma and loneliness. I spent a lot of time alone. When I was a little girl. And so my words and writing really was cathartic and it kept me company when I was growing up. So I loved it. Now, second grade, no, but by the time I got to fifth grade, I started writing and I never stopped.
Okay. Do you remember any of those short stories that you wrote or what they were about, or can you share some of those a little bit?
So my stories were always about friends and relationships, ironically. So even
Mm.
now that I have morphed into like a full award-winning author, my stories are always about relationships. And I'm not sure why I gravitated towards that, but it was always about friendships and trying to fix something that was between friends, whether it was one person would show up wearing the same outfit, or you told your mom to buy this dog that I already had. There's this complicated dynamic between people in a relationship, whether it's a familial relationship, romantic relationship, or just a friendship. But it's these dynamics of friendships and people trying to figure things out together. So those were usually my kids' stories. And then like middle and high school it was very different, like love note stuff, just typical, like age appropriate things that I would write about.
Okay, what was the boy's name in high school? I gotta know. What was the boy's names we were doodling about and putting hearts over his name? What was his name? You don't have to say
I,
his name if you don't want to. It's fine. But I'm
I,
just wanted to mess with you a little bit. Okay, I'm
yeah.
just messing with you a little bit. It's totally fine. Once again, Dripping in Black family, you listen to the Dripping in Black podcast with Tamika Christy, award-winning author of several books. Tamika, you kind of hinted at it and talked about a little bit of those challenges as a kid growing up. For me as a podcaster, I do this as a hobby and as a profession. I work at Meadows Behavioral Healthcare, where I podcast about people's stories of childhood trauma, recovery, and other things like that. So, kind of walk me through some of those challenges you were kind of hinting at earlier, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I love that you do that. And I love talking about mental health, and therapists are super dope, and anybody who works in behavioral therapy, because I think we don't always realize the trauma that we've experienced, or a lot of times people don't even realize they have experienced trauma. Because I think when we think of trauma, it's this some sort of awful abuse or this neglect or hunger. But when I was growing up, my dad was very, very, very strict on me. As a young lady, and I was silenced a lot. I was always made to be very appropriate. And I think you may have experienced children being seen and not heard. And I spent a lot of time by myself. And for me, I didn't realize how much it had affected me as I was growing up, my self-esteem, the way I communicate with people. And even now, as a writer, there are times where I have to like talk myself out and say, like, girl, like you're a lawyer and a writer, and you can do this. So I still at 50 am finding myself pulling myself out of that trauma, that very well intentioned. Like I have no ill feelings or anything negative to say about my dad. He raised me, he did the best that he could, as most parents do. But sometimes there's this unintended consequence of you becoming a certain kind of person. And I have, through that trauma of being alone, and I don't like to use the word abandoned, but I spent a lot of time alone as a child, and that was where a lot of my creativity and my stories came in. And even now as an adult, I can be by myself for extended periods of time and I will be fine. And I realize that while that's okay, there in some ways it is not okay.
You mentioned earlier that, it wasn't until you got older that you kind of realized like some of the stuff that was going on were issues, if you will, right? I think what comes up for me often when I have some of these discussions is the term ACE, adverse childhood experiences, if you will, right? And it made me think about you being, alone, because I know you don't want to use the word abandoned, being alone a lot and stuff like that, which can be one of those aces, if you will. But also, I wonder if being a preacher's kid added to some element to that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's this standard that sometimes when you are a Christian, and we were Pentecostal, just very unrealistic standard of life. I mean, no makeup, very modest dressing. I remember we fellowshipped with a Baptist church one Sunday, and I was a little girl, and I remember seeing these beautiful women outside of the church, and I felt really sad for them because I thought, gosh, they're so pretty, but they're all going to hell because they're wearing makeup. And it just, as I started growing and becoming a teenager, I thought to myself, I am never going to make it to heaven. Like, I'm just not, because I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And not even recognizing in my young mind that these standards that I'm being held to are not even things, most of them are not even in the Bible. They're just things that have been created by through this dogma from church and tradition that a lot of people don't even know why they're doing it. They just are following along with tradition. And it wasn't until I think in my teenage years, I think maybe 18 or 19, I decided that I was not going to go to church at all. And then after a hiatus, I found my own relationship with God. And at first I was kind of angry because it's like, you guys had me living to this standard that wasn't even real. And then I realized that they weren't even living up to the standard that they were projecting on us as children. So it can, I mean, it does in a lot of ways. It makes you question everything that you thought you were, and it makes you a little bit bitter, you know?
No, I definitely understand that, but I want to dive into that spiritual journey that, 17, 18, 19-year-old Tamika and going your own path, right? You grew up in this Pentecostal, very strict household. What did that spiritual journey, that religious journey, that Tamika's journey, walk me through that journey a little bit, if you don't mind.
Looking for something different. Now, being a child of faith and being growing up in a church, you are always looking for something, or I was. So leaving the church didn't mean leaving faith. And so I looked into the Nation of Islam, which is not the same as being Muslim. So I attended meetings there. I started reading some of the things, their information. And some of it did resonate. That was during it was, I think, the early 90s. So it was like X Clan and all of these like the new movement rappers. And I was like, yes, I am Black, I am proud, I don't care. So that was sort of an awakening. And I remember I read Elijah Muhammad's book. I can't remember the name of the book. This is terrible, but it was like about Black people and white people and how white people were born, how they were formed. And I remember thinking, okay, this is not where I want to go either.
Mm.
It was further away than what I wanted to be. And I realized I love believing in God. I like having this faith. I like this is what I have chosen, and I want to be a part of this. Not realizing that there were practices and then there's faith. Like there are two different things. And so I got to a point where I wasn't doing anything. So I was still praying on my own, still writing in my journal. I was journaling to God, but there was no religious practice. There was no church, and I became a mom, and I sent my daughter to a parochial school, and she said, Mom, you should come. We should go to the church. And so we started going to church, and it was non-denominational. It was a Christian church, and it was actually multicultural. And I remember after church one day, I went and I talked to the pastor, and I just randomly asked him, I said, do you think people who smoke cigarettes will go to heaven? And he said, Tamika, he said, there are a lot of things in the Bible that it's hard for us to adhere to. He said, and most of them are things that people have put in, have said that are actually not in the Bible. He said, so if you ask my personal opinion, I think there will be people in heaven who smell like hell. And it was the first time that somebody said to me, like, you can be imperfect and you can have a habit or you can make a mistake in your life, but God is all knowing and all forgiving. And at the end of it all, He is just love. And we're judging and poking and prodding and telling people they can't and talking about things that don't really matter. And at the end of the day, all we have to do is treat people the way that we want to be treated and love God, period. Like that's it. And that brought me to a place of peace where I am comfortable in my faith. I don't like to say religion, but comfortable in my faith and comfortable having a glass of wine or comfortable, I'm still not that comfortable cursing, but comfortable doing different things without thinking that I'm going to burn in a lake of fire and brimstone.
Right. No,
That was a
I
long answer.
gotcha. No, I love this part of the conversation because I think it definitely it shows up in your writing. It shows up in your book Roux that we're going to talk about in a little bit. You were talking earlier about that early 90s period. I'm thinking about, the Malcolm X movie came out around that time and a lot of people wearing the hat with the X on it and stuff like that. You have a hat with the X on it? Did you have one of those as well?
I didn't know,
You did
no.
not?
But I
Okay,
had
okay,
beads. I had the beads. I had
okay.
all the for the yeah.
Okay, I love that. Once again, Driven Black Family, we are talking to the amazing Tamika Christy, who is the author of a new book, Roux. And so, like I said, I love that we were having this conversation about your background and your insight and some of that childhood trauma because it really shows up in your writing in your book, Roux. Just kind of talk about Roux a little bit and what inspired you to write it.
So I write books about, I think I mentioned earlier about families and complicated family dynamics. At an early age, like 30, I was aunt, mom, grandma, helping a lot of my first cousins. There were 11 of us, and somehow I became this de facto person that everybody would come to. And I reflect a lot of that in my writing because not only because of the experiences that I learned through dealing and being a part of my family, but also the mistakes that I made. So I was very much this know-it-all because I was the one in the family who went to college and I am a member of this organization and I know these things. And so one day, one of my cousins said to me, there was a big thing that happened. I said, why didn't you guys call me? And I said, well, we didn't want to call you. We didn't want to involve you. And when they were telling me what happened, I was like, oh no, I would have just called the police. Like, what are you guys thinking? And they said, that's why we don't tell you anything, because you judge us. And of course, I'm like, I'm just trying to make your life better. But in that moment, I had to stop and reflect and remind myself that just because my way is the way that I choose to do things, it doesn't mean that it's the right way. And so through a lot of those interactions, I realized that I was making horrible mistakes with them and saying things that were not nice and very judgmental, because when people are doing their best, you can be supportive without putting them down or condemning. And so Roux is a testament to how we interact, very well-intentioned, with our family, and particularly mother-daughter relationships, and how those unintended effects the unintended effects that it has on our children, and then how it trickles down through the generations. So you see how Addie was put on this pedestal, and she was one of the only Black kid in this high school, and super high standards that were set for her. And she imposed that on her daughter, who almost became paralyzed and making horrible mistakes and decisions because she too wanted to be perceived as perfection. And again, very well intentioned, but I like to write about real life things, because a lot of us, our parents or our grandparents, yeah, of course, we all are in therapy because of our parents and grandparents, but I don't think there are very many of us can say that it was because they hated us or they didn't love us. They did the best that they could. My dad didn't hug me, but my grandma probably never hugged him. And then when I think about what she went through with my great grandmother, like, it's just a cycle that goes on. And I like to write about people that take a moment to say, you know what? We weren't doing therapy when I was growing up. I don't know anything about depression. We would get out in that field and do what we had to do. Instead, say, you know what? This was not a part of my generation or a part of something that I went through, but how can I support you and be here for you? And that's what I want us to see through our dynamics with our friends and our romantic partners and our family members. Is it may not resonate, it might not even make sense, but we can still sit back. I'm here. Okay, let me try to understand this.
No, I love that piece, and I love that you talk about generational trauma in your book, because one of the senior fellows that I work with in my day job, if you will, is Resma Menicum, and he talks about often that it takes 15 generations to overcome generational trauma, adverse experiences, and stuff like that. So it really does require a lot of work, a lot of foundational work that you definitely just highlighted in that piece just now. You know, talk about, because is written very uniquely, in the sense of, like, it's a non-linear type of storytelling, if you will, where you have multiple timelines and stuff like that. What made you want to write it that way? I'm curious about that part. Let's get into the weeds a little bit, if you don't mind.
Because I really wanted to highlight the different generations and what they experience. So a minute ago, I just talked about how we can support each other in different generations without understanding what the other person went through. And I used the multiple generations so that we could see them and feel them. You could see Earlene in that house making dresses, doing her best for her children, having experienced some of the things that she experienced. And then you can see the next generation in Manon and how she handles herself. And then you get down Gen Z with Emerson, who's just like, I don't care about anything. I don't care about trauma. I just want to know my people. So I really wanted to give an intimate look into the perspective of these women and how it carries through the family. To have three women from three different generations who are all estranged from the family for three very different reasons. One, because of addiction and sort of self-estrangement because she's ashamed. Another, because she just thinks she's better than everybody else because they have issues. And another one, because her mom, she's estranged through because of her mom. And they all find their way back in their journey to healing in very different ways, but based on their generations.
Absolutely. Tamika, talk about talk about why a book like Roux is important. I know for me, when I do my work at the Meadows, and I release an episode about a person's journey through recovery, and I'll get like a phone call, text message, email. And so, like, you know what? I thought I was the only person going through this. I know nobody could relate to it. I thought nobody could, whatever. But when I listen to your podcast, or in your case, Tamika, read your book, I understand there's some similarities there, which means that if there's similarities there, that means I can go get help. I can go talk to somebody. I can go whatever. Talk about the importance of a book like Roux, not just in the recovery community, but just anybody going through challenging times in their life.
I used to always say, I'm not a therapist, but I play one in my books. And so I feel like my books are the closest fiction to nonfiction that you can get. I cover all of the real life issues of addiction, divorce, mental illness, body changes, and at least one or more characters in all three of my books are in therapy, and you actually experience therapy and things that they talk about and things that they go through. And I think it's important for us because I personally, as much as I love to read, I've always loved reading, it is really hard for me to get into nonfiction unless it's maybe somebody super interesting. But most of the time it's fiction. So I think for people who are reading a book that is for entertainment and they find a way to see themselves or see their behaviors, I think it's gold. Because a lot of times nobody wants to be preached to, you are not supposed to or giving you, but if you read something that resonates, you can absorb it a little easier. And I can't tell you the number of like emails and text messages where people are like, this makes me think about my relationship with mom or my relationship with my daughter. And what I want people to realize is that we're all just doing our best. Our parents are just doing their best. And for me, I mean, both of my parents are gone now. And I remind people all the time, I know, I understand what you go through. Like with my dad, when he was passing away, he had cancer. We were able to spend a lot of time together during COVID. And I said to him, I was really disappointed in everything that happened when we were in church and how these strict rules. And he said, I was a single father when I was 25 years old. I come from Louisiana. He said, and the first thing that I could think of to do was to join church. He said, and I didn't hold you to any standard that I didn't hold myself to. And he apologized if it hurt me. And when I thought about it, there was no secular music in my house. My dad did not curse when I was growing up. He was a very handsome man. There were no women. So he was one of the few people that I saw walk the walk. And later on, it made me angry that he kind of held me to that standard. But when he told me I was just doing the same thing and doing the best that I could for you, that was all that I needed to release a lot of anger and resentment that I had built up in my lifetime. Because I'm like, dang, I'm this old and I'm still struggling with esteem and different speaking up for myself because I was silenced for so long. So I want people to be able to see those relationships and different instances and different things that maybe they've done or have been on the receiving end of and say, you know what, this is okay and I can get through it. Like my books also have these messages of hope and redemption because we can get through anything. Black people, we can get through anything.
I love that you said that piece just now because I definitely want to go in that direction a bit. But I love this piece of you having that. First of all, my condolences, right? I want to say that first and foremost. But I love that you had that moment or this frame of time to kind of have that that time with your dad, right? I'm a father of two girls, and so I know that relationship is very sacred. I mean, all relationships with kids are sacred, but there's something special in a different way when it comes to a father and daughter. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
So he was a single dad,
Hmm.
and he was very strict. He taught me a lot about morals and integrity, and your yay being your nay, your yay being yay and nay being nay. He was really, really big on that. And even though I struggle with different things on like interpersonally with myself, the ethics that I have as a person, my values, integrity, trying to be upstanding, I owe them all to my father. We spent a lot of time together when I was growing up. In high school, I did become a mom very early. And when I became pregnant, he came to me and he said, I hope you don't add insult to injury and get an abortion. And that broke me, and it really did kind of break our relationship a lot. I was very hurt. And then he told me, you're going to go to hair school so you can take care of yourself and this baby. I said, no, I'm going to college. He's like, no, you're going to go to hair school so that you can take care of yourself and that baby. So I'm not taking care of the baby. I went through college, I went through law school, and it was kind of estranged for a long time in my 20s and 30s. And I got a call one day and they said, your dad's in the hospital. You're going to need to help him. He's not getting out this weekend. He's not going to make it through. So I went there and we had a conversation. And he did make it through. He lived 20 years after that. And our relationship, we mended over time, and he apologized to me and talked about how disappointed he was. I talked about how disappointed I was in him. But he was a great dad. He was a wonderful grandfather to the girls. He was really, really close to them. So we had that rift for a number of years where I just felt like he's not here for me. He doesn't understand me and he's saying these awful things to me. But in my mind, I'm like, it's your fault because you never told me about contraceptives. You never, because it's the blaming him. But we ended up working our way back. And I have to be honest and say, even though it's a lot, I don't know that I would change anything because I wouldn't be the person that I am today. He was an incredible man.
Absolutely, and I love that you talk so glowingly about him. So, thank you for that. I want to ask you something similar in that vein, if you will, Tamika. Because in the behavioral health community, we talk about this idea of reparenting, right? Giving ourselves as an adult what we didn't have as a young person, as a kid, as a young adult. Do you find yourself doing that for yourself? And maybe that even comes out with your daughters as well. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yes, all the time. And I try to remember things that hurt me or isolated me or silenced me when I was younger. And when the girls were younger, I was the same way. Like, don't talk back, don't say anything. And of course, I still don't allow, my daughters to talk to me a certain way, but I do give them room for opinions. I do give them room to cry and disagree with me, which is something that I was not allowed to do. And I do have to take time to myself and say, give yourself grace, give yourself credit and stop being so hard on yourself and don't be so hard on the girls. Because I remember one year I brought home a report card and I had all A's and I had a B. And I remember him just going in on me about this B, and I felt bad about it. But then when I think about it now, I'm like, what? But I would be the same way with my girls, like, oh, that was good, but, or, oh. And so over time, I began to realize you are doing the same thing because I could see it in their eyes, like, look, mommy. And it's like, oh, yeah, but you're outside of the line, just completely unintended, but it hurts. And we don't realize, especially for girls, what it does to their self-esteem. And I think that's why dads usually bring a different perspective because they're just all, you are beautiful, you are my princess, you are my, whereas moms sometimes can be a little bit like, I see myself in you and I don't want you to do the same thing I did. So we can be a little more critical. But my dad was my only parent. And so he was kind of doing a little bit of all that. So my youngest daughter, she tells people all the time, my mom is my biggest hype man, and I am. Everything, she is an incredible, incredible, beautiful, talented, resilient young lady. And I get emotional. And sometimes I can't believe that I was able to do that, that through everything that I have been through and have been, that I'm able to be the mom that I am to her. And it feels really good, but I would not have been able to do it without the relationship that I had with my dad and realizing this worked, this didn't work. So you're going to have to reprogram and reparent yourself, not only as a daughter, but to be a better mother.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask this last question before we kind of transition here, Tamika, because you talked about how we as a community of Black people are resilient, right? I mean, we don't have to go back and rehash the last 400 years, the last 150 years. We know that history, right? But when I look at your book, Roux, and I see some of the challenges that you discuss and some of the challenges you discuss in your personal life, it really does speak to that resiliency. But it also requires work, whether it be through therapy, through religion or faith, if you will, and what have you. Talk about the importance Roux plays in helping people understand that it's okay to talk to a therapist. It's okay to seek faith. It's okay to seek these positive things because I think sometimes in our community we feel like, oh, well, my life has been negative. I'm doomed to just continue in negative things. kind of talk about the importance of Roux in that regard, if you don't mind.
So I think I mentioned earlier in my stories, I keep it in fiction, but it's very much rooted in nonfiction. I think when you see these people and you hear their thoughts and some of the awful things that they're enduring from abuse, assault, addiction, these different things, and you're here and you're with them on this journey and you can hear their thoughts and you see this woman of prominent with these health issues and a failing marriage, and she's sitting on the phone on the computer every week with a therapist and realizing that she can be okay and finding ways to be better. And I think that resonates with people because they're like, okay, well, if Manon can go to therapy, I can go to therapy. Or even in my last two novels, if Nadia's in therapy, I can go to therapy. Or let me just see what this is about. Because sometimes we see or we read things and it may you in hearing it, you may think, okay, I'm going to go to therapy. But when you read it in a book or is your favorite character it's happening to them, then you may think, okay, I'm going to try this. But I think the real world issues that are happening in there are relatable. And I think people will be able to look at that and say, I think I can do this. I think I can get through this. If Odessa can get through that addiction and she can work through the things that she has, and look at how Manon's mom treated her, and my mom was not half as bad as that, I can probably get through this too. But you know what? I probably need help doing it. So I think it gives us real life situations and real life imperfect, flawed people that are trying their best to be better. Because at the end of the day, tomorrow is not promised, but it might show up. And if it shows up, why not try and keep trying to be a little bit better and healed? Why are we just going to live in that? Why are we going to sit in that? It doesn't make sense.
No, I definitely hear and receive everything you're saying right now. And let me just say, Tamika, that like coming from the behavioral health space, I appreciate this book. I appreciate what you're doing. And it's so needed because we know that, like, listen, I can give you stats from the CDC and figures from whoever, right? But when I share a story, right, because what we know, one of the main enemies of recovery is isolation, and addiction is isolation, right? And so what I think what Roux does, it breaks that isolation. It makes it relatable. It makes people feel like, okay, I'm listening to this story. There's some similarities in my journey. Maybe there's hope for me. So I just want to say on behalf of myself, S Squared Behind the Glass and the Driven and Black family, thank you so much for writing this book because it's so needed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for appreciating it. People appreciate the book for different reasons, but I'm so happy when people can receive it and appreciate it from this lens because Manon, that is exactly what she does is she isolates and you see her friend like, okay, when are you going to get out of the house? And seemingly with everything, right? What people perceive as having everything, but she is still struggling. So I really appreciate it. I can't tell you, like when I write, I'm always thinking in terms of therapy and growth and reparenting. And the drama and the other stuff is good too.
Right,
I
right.
always appreciate when people receive it that way. Because I could be a therapist, I could be.
No, no. Listen,
I'm just kidding.
no, no, no. I think about honestly, real talk. I think about 90 to 95% of the people, at the very least, who work in behavioral health and work at the Meadows are in recovery, are in active recovery, right? So it makes complete sense that you very well could be. And I think you have a therapist soul, if you will, in that regard. So, do with that what you will. Once again, Dripping in Black family, we are talking to Tamika Christy, who is also a writing coach. Go to tamikachristy.com if that's something that you're interested in doing. She's a phenomenal coach. And that leads me to this question, because I know you were, had a legal career and stuff like that. And I'm curious because one of the things when I talk to attorneys or whatever, they said if they could go back, during, undergrad and major in a particular set of studies, it would be English, right? Because English kind of helps with, writing legal briefs and stuff like that. I guess I'm curious, how much has your legal career kind of helped and lend credence to your writing career, if that makes sense?
Legal writing is not what people think. When I was in law
Okay.
school, it used to tell us when you write something, you need to write as if you're explaining it to a 5-year-old. So a lot of times some of the like flowery, over the top, overwhelming writing is exactly the opposite of what they taught us in law school. And so for me as a creative writer, and I did major in English actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. But
That
as
makes
a
sense.
creative writer, it helps me to be creative, but then also to write in a way that's simple. I use like in my stories, you can understand where I'm going. So it helps me to be more practical and definitely in technical writing, definitely in writing projects, that part, but it didn't lend to the creativity part at all.
That makes sense. That makes complete sense to me. So I was on, your Instagram feed, and one of the things you were kind of sharing with some of your followers was the Stephen King kind of model of like writing every day and daily and stuff like that. I guess I'm just curious, about your teaching style when it comes to writing. Why do people, resonate with your teaching style? How come people are able to take what you're able to do, get that consultation, book meetings and book sessions with you, and then go on and be writers themselves? What is it about you that people really love about your teaching style when it comes to writing?
I like to think that I can be authentic with people that I'm coaching, and I help them find a voice. I've worked with people who have come to me after having a fully edited book and like, oh, I'm ready to launch my book. And I'm like, no, you're not. But being able to help people find in a very genuine way their writing voice, because every writing style is not for everybody. So I take a very practical approach during the first time that we work together. I'll take a piece of their work and I'll ask them to read it out loud and then I'll read it out loud. And sometimes it can be kind of, cringe-worthy. But it does take time to kind of get there. So I think being authentic, I think coming from a place where when I read my first book, I cringe, and being able to say writing is about growth and it's about finding your voice and writing things that matter. So we always go through a who, what, where, when, why. Who are you as a writer and why are you writing? Who are you writing for and who is your audience? So we go through this whole process of development. And once we've gone through that, the writing, you can see the metamorphosis and how the writing evolves and how it changes. Because I think some people come in thinking they can be a Leanne Mority or Alice Walker, but you have to be yourself as a writer. And that is what comes through in your writing. And that will resonate. It's the authenticity of your voice. That has helped my writing clients a lot. Because there's always the imposter syndrome of writing something the way somebody else does, or writing in a way that you think other people will receive, but you have to have your own niche. If you think about a Spike Lee movie, like they're very distinct, they're different from other types of movies. But it's his style. And it's the same with writing. There are millions of writers in the world, but there's only one you. So you can only tell your story. Nobody else can tell your story. And you can only tell it in your voice and in your way.
And I think that speaks to something you said earlier, words you mentioned earlier, authenticity, right? Kind of talk about that importance because listen, let's call a spade, Tamika. We live in an age where people are trying to get clicks, downloads, sales, this and the other, and we often write based on what we think people want to hear, right?
Mhm.
But I think and now we have AI out here writing stuff or whatever. Right now, I feel like we're at a point where authenticity has never been more important than it is
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
Kind of talk
Mhm.
about that importance, if you don't mind, from your vantage point.
I think that you can only pretend to be something for so long, and you can clickbait and you can do everything for clicks or likes, but at the end of it, the real you is going to show up. My dad used to say that all the time. The real you is going to show up. And I think if you show up as yourself, and meaning your voice, your social media, however you decide to show up and be yourself, I think that will resonate with people. We are not going to resonate with everybody. Everybody is not going to like us, and that's fine. But the people who do, they will stick around. And so I talk about that a lot with my writing clients. And even, on my social media, like I try on Instagram, I put some of the better photos up, but I show up. I showed up today with no makeup. So I try to, because I don't want people to run into me in the streets and be like,
You still look
not,
fantastic. You
that's
still look
not you.
fantastic.
Thank you. But I do think that sometimes we have to, because if you do something for a click or you do something that's not real, then what are you going to do the next time? Like, how do you outdo something that is not real? And as for AI, I think It's not a good writing tool. I tell people that all the time. And I actually had somebody helping me with my social media, and she was using AI all the time. And I told her, like, there's a very distinctive voice in AI, and it is not an authentic writing voice. And I think non-writers don't recognize that. They think, oh my God, this is great. But real writers are like, we don't use words like enchanting. Like it doesn't happen. So there is no substitute for your own voice. You can AI as much as you want, but your voice and your story and your tone is always going to outmatch something that's computer generated, always.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This has been a phenomenal conversation on my end. Hopefully it has been for you as well. I really appreciate your time and your insight. And again, Dripping in Black Family, you can go to tamikachristy.com to get her latest novel, Roux, which is a phenomenal book, has multiple 5-star ratings over on Amazon. So please make sure you go to tamikachristy.com to purchase her latest novel. And, as I ask this last question, as Square is going to get ready to start queuing something, we have a special presentation and gift for you before we kind of let you get out of here. I want to ask you this last question because you mentioned your daughters, earlier, and I believe their names are Allegra and Cameron. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned your daughters. Just kind of talk about, you know, what it means for you personally to set an example of being a woman, being a Black woman, being successful in the space that you're in, and just being that overall, ideal woman or ideal person moving forward. Just kind of talk about that a little bit and what that means to you.
It's everything. With my daughters, I don't try to be ideal. I do try to be myself as much as possible. And I want them to realize that it is okay to make mistakes. We are going to inevitably make the wrong decisions and the wrong choices, but it's okay. I like to see them seeing me being gentle with myself and giving myself grace. And allowing myself to say sorry. Like, I am big on apologizing if I have wronged you, even if it's unintentional, because I want them to grow up with a peace and a space of comfort where you can be yourself and you can have opinions and you can go left or you can go right and you can come back and you can redo it over without burning bridges or hurting people's feelings or compromising yourself or your integrity. And that has always been very important to me because my dad was like that. He was honest with me a lot, and I never saw him saying one thing and then doing something different when we were in public. And that mattered a lot to me, and I think it contributes to who I am as a person. And so that's why it's always been really important for me to show them, of course, with boundaries, because I am still their mom. So they don't need to know all the things, but the important things.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We got to tell our kids everything. They ain't got to know it all. That's definitely fair. So
Thank
no, thank you.
God there was no social media
Listen,
back.
listen,
I
listen.
wouldn't be here today.
And I'm just gonna leave it at that. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
that.
This was great. Thank
Of
you so
course.
much.
Of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
of course. And so before we let you go, S Squared has something for you because anytime somebody comes on a Dripping in Black, you become alumni, right? And we like to treat you as such. And so we like to give you something as a memento, as a keepsake to let you know that we appreciate your time coming on Dripping in Black and just kind of immortalize our time here. And so we're just gonna wait for S
Okay.
Squared to kind of pull that up for us a little bit here. There we go. How about that? So now
That's
again,
beautiful. Look
yeah,
at
so
me.
yeah, you will forever be immortalized in the Driven in Black family with your own magazine cover. So eventually, in a few weeks here, we'll get that out to you. And just like I said, it's just a way to say thank you for coming on Dripping in Black. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank Thank you guys so much. Thank you for following up and giving me the in-depth interview. You knew all the things. I
I
like
knew, I
that.
knew, I knew a little bit. I knew a little bit. I knew a little bit. All righty. So again, thank you so much, Tamika Christy, for coming on the show. Listeners, be sure to go to tamikachristy.com and also, like, again, purchase your copy of Roux. It's flying off the shelves, people. It has multiple 5-star reviews on Amazon. Make sure you get that. And also, if you're thinking about becoming a writer, again, go to tamikachristy.com. And also, again, as well, thank you for coming on the show. And also, Dripping in Black family, make sure you want to get this cool merch that I got here, this hoodie. Go to dibkdripshop.com. Thank you, S Square, for letting me be a guest host once again. More importantly, thank you, Dripping in Black family, for allowing me to serve you in this role. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. And thank you for subscribing. And until next time, be kind, be excellent on purpose. It's a choice. And as always, keep it black. Peace.
Much appreciation goes out to the Ambiance Media Group for their special contribution to this episode, with a special thanks to Miss D. Allen. Visit their website at www.ambiancemediagroup.com and follow them on social media at Ambiance Media Group.
You have just experienced a Dripping in Black production.